Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the number 2. The twos have a tendency to be close to each other. 2 speaks to intimacy. 2 speaks to the spirit of survival through community. Um, though I will say, not really community yet. When we think about the number 2, we're more so thinking about partnership. Um, 2 is better than 1. There's just this common accepted idea that we are not meant to be alone. And it's whether it's the idea that if you have a child, you need to give them a sibling, or the idea that working together, being in a relationship, um, not just eating one type of food, but diversifying your diet. And if you're not going to be able to eat more than one, at least, a few things, at least eat two different things. 2 is expansive, and 2. I'm sorry, I'm so distracted. I'm just trying to organize these things. But with the number 2, we begin to see us evolve in our understanding of what we can do. In the energy of 2, we begin to gain confidence and trust in ourselves and in our ability to exist on this plane or exist in general. We feel supported. 2 is also where you can first begin to recognize the separation of self, recognizing that you are both yourself and you are also a soul. And being able to acknowledge that difference is its own thing. It's its own experience, its own journey. But that's where we first begin to recognize the difference between spirits and incarnating beings is through the energy of the number 2. 2s can be tricky because they ask you to forget your own needs in one way or another, and they ask you to adopt the needs of a collective and begin to step outside of yourself, which can be intense and scary and stressful and strange, and you could just downright not want to do that. What are we missing here? We're missing nothing. Sometimes 2 can not feel like enough, because once you get a taste of another energy paired with your own, you start to wonder, well, why not more? 2 really is expansive energy in the idea that now you're starting to think, if I can have this, I can have this, I can have that. You can get with this, or you can get with that. You can get with this, or you can get with that. 2 makes you start to contemplate. 2 begins to make you think. 2 is the number that can really make you overthink. 2 is where you can really have trouble being satisfied with what you have. The grass is always green, or I have this job, but maybe I want this job, but what about this job? It's really where the options begin to surmount only because you have something to go with your one thing. That now you're like, well, how many other things can I pair with this? It's not necessarily the building blocks yet. It's more so like you've got this one little thing coming up next to your one, and it looks like you, and you're like, oh, so we've got mirrors here. But then when they combine and they create this whole thing, it's like, oh wow, I've made this really interesting shape. What else can I make? 2 can be a number that we easily get over, or we get past, we get through really quickly. It's an energy that you can undervalue and underappreciate because it's so fast. Once it comes in, it's here, and you're like, whoa. And instead of really contemplating how did you get here, you're like, okay, now what can we build together, right? You get into a partnership with someone, and while you might linger on wow, how did we find each other? You immediately begin to think about the life you can have together, the life you can build together. Two is like you start to really dream about more. You start to ask for more. You start to want and desire more for yourself, usually in a very positive way. But sometimes two can get greedy, two can miss the purpose, can lack a little bit of patience and gratitude, just simply from the fact that you naturally feel compelled to add more to your plate because you're like, oh, I can handle this. I can handle being next to another energy. What else is possible? It is the energy of the student in those ways, but the curious student who is perhaps a bit, who could be overachieving, overly ambitious, not in a bad way, just more ambitious than most, and the one that wants to move fast and get all the information. Two can ask a lot of questions, and really want to dive deep. Two is the number that can make you want to grow up faster than you need to because you're rushing for independence. You're rushing to get everywhere. You think about 2-year-olds and how now that they're walking and they're talking and they're running, the world is their oyster and they want to go everywhere and they want to do anything and they want to eat everything and they just want to experience it all and they want their independence, but they still want home. So you want who you've always been, who you've known yourself to be. You want your future. You want your past. You want it all. You want everything and you want it to work in balance in the way that you consider balance. Two is a very determined number. There's an ask, a desire for a lot of agency. You desire a lot of choice, but the stumbling with twos is that you don't really know how to make those choices yet. You don't really know what's best yet. You don't really know how you want to build or what you want to build because you don't you don't know anything yet. You're only two. You're only the number two. You've just gotten this other thing together and now you've just made your first creation as a creator. So two is now like the generations begin. Two is when we start to get into the energy of generational trauma, generational inheritance, generational legacies. We start to see family patterns because two is the first descendant of nothingness. So two is fully in the incarnating experience. Two is fully in the lived, embodied experience. Two is the granddaughter or the grandson, the grandchild of nothingness. So there is that tether to the empty world, to the darkness, and there is that understanding, but there is also that distance. And that distance puts a weight of responsibility on two to be able to carry forward a legacy. There's now the understanding of the crone energy really actually starts to begin with two, because the crone would be nothing, the mother would be the number one, and the maiden would be the number two. So you really start to begin to understand that more so with the crone, with the number two, and I'm sorry, the crone would be 0. But yeah, two is where you really begin to foster a sense of responsibility for legacy, for inheritance, and in carrying that on. You start to think about who you've been a lot more than one would have. You start to think about what you owe. Two is also where you can start to see karma, because you feel this energy of cycles, of reciprocation, of mirroring happening. You can acknowledge multiple paths. Two really, really does broaden your perspective and deepen your perspective, especially from the incarnating experience. Two helps you to really look up, move your head around, move your gaze, and really begin to think. Think more deeply, think more broadly, think more. That's why it's interesting, because the twos in the tarot, you've got Judgment, and you've got the High Priestess. I was going to include Justice, and you could include Justice because it is 11, which is 2, but I want to leave that separately because I just do for now, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But anyways, yeah, that is the 2s in a snapshot, from, just me thinking out loud. You guys let me know what you think about the number 2. What is your understanding of the 2s? Yeah, and I mean, this is obviously just like not even scratching the surface, but I just thought it would be interesting to talk about the spiritual significance of the 2s, as I've learned them, as I know so far, just from talking. So yeah, please feel free to share your ideas, and if you want me to go further into the 2s, I think that'd be cool. I'd love to. Even maybe looking at like the different variants of 2, and even just looking at like 2, like all the ways that it exists in our language. 2 is a branch word. It's a branching word. 2 is how you connect different words, different ideas. And in the number sense, it also is that branch. It's that branch to show you, yes, you can actually build alongside. Yes, this works. 2 is the first confirmation. 2 is the first follower, which is its own form of leadership. And as I've learned these past few months, is a very powerful form of leadership. 2 is a very understated, underappreciated form of power. Probably one of the most powerful forms that we have in our lifetime is when we're like 2 years old, because you are so free and there is so much room. People can give you a lot of room to be very, very free, depending on what culture you're raised in. But just generally, there's a lot of accepted freedom for that age range because there's just an acceptance that they need to explore, and that inherent desire to explore, well, it's considered inherent, and it's considered your right, and it's considered necessary. And there's never a time really beyond that when we are given such a privilege of being taken seriously as explorers, being taken seriously as curious people, curious beings. 2 is really such a curious number, very experimental. There's never a time beyond, maybe when you start to really invest in your studies and school and things like that. Other than that, and even there, it's limited. When your curiosity and your willingness to experiment is so valued and accepted, that's a very rare position that we hold within the number 2 in our human existence. And it's part of its power is because it is not seen. It's not glaring in your eyes. We allow ourselves to kind of turn our heads away and let the 2s do what they will. And that hidden aspect of it really protects the curious, adventurous nature that 2 needs in order to grow, the experimental nature that 2 needs in order to grow. That's why when you think about the 2s connected to all other numbers, they're always kind of mundane. And that's because there are those ages, there are those experiences that need the space to not be seen, the space to not be recognized, so they can do whatever they need to grow and be as crazy as they need to be and just get it done without so much judgment. Funnily enough, though, in the tarot, the Judgment card is the number 20, which is 2 and 0. Think about the relationship in the most positive sense, even in the darkest sense, between a grandparent and the grandchild. It's a relationship that really delves in the curious, really delves in the spirit world and the living world, really answers the idea of these 2 spectrums of existence coming together, and shares the knowledge of age and wisdom and youth and that connection to spirit that they both hold. And it's a very curious relationship, and it's one of a kind. And it's considered sacred, and it's protected. It's not something that everybody has their hands in their business in the same way that we do with friendships, with romantic relationships with your parents. We don't talk a lot about relationships with grandparents in a super dissecting way. We kind of leave that alone. The 2s, you kind of just get left alone. You're 2, you get left alone. You're 12, it's like, okay, you get left alone. You even have your own word though, tween. It's the in between. It's a special space. It's a transition space. It's a gray space, and we understand the sacredness so much that we make it mundane to protect it. 22, what are you doing at 22? Who knows? 32, who knows? 42, who knows? Nobody knows what you're doing at these ages. It doesn't matter. It's not 18. It's not 16. It's not 15. It's not 13. It's not these numbers that are, it's not 8. It's the 2s. You've got the terrible 2s. They've always got an energy to them. People recognize them. They recognize their presence. They recognize their power through culturally all of these different ways. But still, they're still somewhat mundane. They're still brushed off to the side. They're still given a lot of room to just, okay, go do whatever you need to do. So the 2s are very interesting. Okay. We can talk more about that later if people want to. Please feel free to share your thoughts about the number 2 with me. Your spiritual thoughts, your mathematical thoughts, it's all spirit. Yeah.